Imagine suffocating slowly over the course of years. That's Mars. Not the romantic salmon-skied frontier from science fiction novels, but a frozen radiation furnace wrapped in poison dust where every single breath, every drop of water, every heartbeat depends on machines that will eventually fail. What if everything you've been told about Mars colonization is a lie? And here is a question. If you could only bring 3 personal items to Mars for your first year, what would they be? Comment down below. I will pin the most creative answer. Now let's begin. The problem isn't that we can't reach Mars. We absolutely can, and we will. The problem is what happens to the human body when it gets there, and whether we can ever truly overcome the fundamental hostility of the Martian environment. Because Mars isn't just inhospitable, it's actively destructive to human biology in ways that we're only beginning to fully understand. Let me paint you a picture of what stepping onto Mars would actually be like, stripped of the romantic imagery we see in movies and promotional videos. First, the atmospheric pressure. On Earth, we live under about 100 kilopascals of atmospheric pressure at sea level. That's the weight of all the air above us pressing down, and our bodies are perfectly adapted to it. On Mars, the atmospheric pressure averages around 610 pascals. That's not 610 kilopascals, just 610 pascals. We're talking about less than 1% of Earth's atmospheric pressure. That's roughly equivalent to being 35 kilometers above Earth's surface, well above the Armstrong limit, the altitude where water boils at human body temperature. What does that mean for you? If you stepped onto Mars without a pressurized suit, the liquids in your body would begin to boil. Not because Mars is hot, it's actually freezing cold, but because at such low pressure, liquids vaporize at much lower temperatures. Your saliva would boil off your tongue, the moisture in your eyes would bubble and evaporate. You'd lose consciousness within 15 seconds as the oxygen in your blood began to form bubbles, a condition called ebullition. Within 2 minutes, you'd be dead. But let's say you're wearing a perfectly functioning spacesuit. You're protected from the pressure problem. Surely you can survive now, right? Well, now we encounter the second deadly characteristic of Mars, the atmosphere itself, or rather, what it's made of. Mars's atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide. There's virtually no oxygen, just 0.13% of the atmosphere, compared to Earth's 21%. Nitrogen, which makes up 78% of Earth's atmosphere, accounts for only 2.7% on Mars. Argon makes up another 1.6%. The rest is trace amounts of other gases. You cannot breathe Martian air, period. Even if the pressure were somehow magically increased to Earth-like levels, you'd still suffocate because there's no oxygen to breathe. Every single breath you take on Mars must come from a life support system that either brings oxygen from Earth or manufactures it on Mars. There is no backup. There is no opening a window for fresh air. There is no stepping outside without your helmet for just a moment. One failure of your oxygen supply means death within minutes. Temperature is the third assault on human survival. Mars is cold in ways that are difficult for most people to comprehend. The average temperature on Mars is around -63 degrees Celsius. That's -81 degrees Fahrenheit. But averages don't tell the whole story. At the Martian equator during summer, temperatures might climb to a relatively balmy 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. That sounds pleasant, almost comfortable. But at night, temperatures plummet to -73 degrees Celsius, which is -99 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's at the equator during summer. At the poles during winter, temperatures drop to -125 degrees Celsius. That's -193 degrees Fahrenheit. At those temperatures, carbon dioxide literally freezes out of the atmosphere and falls as dry ice snow. Human beings are not built for this. We evolved in equatorial Africa where temperatures rarely drop below freezing. Our bodies maintain a core temperature of about 37 degrees Celsius. Any significant deviation from that and critical biological processes start to fail. Hypothermia begins when your core temperature drops to 35 degrees Celsius. At 32 degrees, you lose consciousness. At 28 degrees, your heart stops. On Mars, without constant heating, your body would lose heat so rapidly that you'd be in severe hypothermia within minutes, dead within an hour. Every structure, every habitat, every vehicle must be continuously heated. One power failure during the Martian night could be catastrophic. While we're talking about the deadly realities of being on Mars, have you ever actually observed Mars itself from Earth? I created a guide, Mars in 15 minutes, the No Telescope Observation Guide. It shows you exactly where to look tonight. No telescope, no degree in astronomy. Just you and the red planet. Staring at Mars while knowing these deadly secrets is unforgettable. The link is in the description. Check it out. But here's where Mars reveals its truly insidious nature, the characteristic that might be the most dangerous of all, precisely because it's invisible and silent. Radiation. Earth is wrapped in a protective magnetic field called the magnetosphere, generated by the churning molten iron in our planet's outer core. This magnetic bubble extends thousands of kilometers into space, deflecting most of the charged particles that stream constantly from the sun, the solar wind. Additionally, we have a thick atmosphere that absorbs and scatters much of the radiation that does make it through. These two shields, magnetic field and atmosphere, protect us from a universe that is, quite literally, trying to irradiate us to death. Mars has neither of these protections. About 4 billion years ago, Mars did have a global magnetic field. Scientists know this because ancient rocks on Mars retain magnetic signatures frozen in records of that long-dead field. But something happened. The leading theory is that Mars's core cooled and solidified much faster than Earth's because Mars is smaller, only about half Earth's diameter and roughly 1/10 Earth's mass. A smaller planet loses heat more quickly. When the core stopped churning, the magnetic field died. Without that magnetic shield, the solar wind began stripping away Mars's atmosphere over millions of years. What was once a thicker, possibly warmer atmosphere gradually eroded into the thin wisp of gas that remains today. And without a thick atmosphere or magnetic field, the surface of Mars is bathed in radiation. Let me put some numbers on this, because the scale of the problem is staggering. On Earth, at sea level, you're exposed to about 0.3 millisieverts of radiation per year from cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are high-energy particles, mostly protons, that originate from supernovae, active galactic nuclei, and other violent cosmic events. They're traveling at nearly the speed of light, carrying enormous energy. Earth's magnetosphere and atmosphere absorb most of them. On the International Space Station, orbiting at about 400 kilometers altitude, astronauts are above much of Earth's atmosphere, but still within the magnetosphere's protection. Even so, they receive about 150 millisieverts per year, about 500 times more radiation than someone on Earth's surface. On Mars's surface, based on measurements from the Curiosity rover's radiation assessment detector, astronauts would receive approximately 229 millisieverts per year. That's just from the baseline cosmic radiation. During a solar particle event, a burst of high-energy particles from the Sun following a solar flare or coronal mass ejection, radiation levels can spike dramatically, potentially delivering dozens of millisieverts in just hours. Now, what does this mean for human health? Radiation exposure is measured in sieverts, and the effects depend on the dose and the time over which it's received. A sudden dose of 1 sievert, 1,000 millisieverts, will cause radiation sickness, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, and potential long-term health effects including cancer. 4 to 5 sieverts delivered quickly is lethal to about 50% of people exposed. 10 sieverts is invariably fatal within weeks. Long-term, chronic exposure to lower doses, like what astronauts on Mars would experience, increases cancer risk. Current NASA guidelines limit astronauts to a 3% increase in their lifetime cancer mortality risk. For a 35-year-old astronaut, that translates to a maximum career dose of about 800 to 1,000 millisieverts, depending on age and gender. Do the math. At 229 millisieverts per year on Mars, an astronaut would reach NASA's career limit in just 3.5 to 4.5 years, and that's assuming no solar particle events, which is unrealistic. Solar particle events are unpredictable and can be devastating. During the August 1972 solar storm, radiation levels spiked so high that astronauts on the Moon would have received a potentially lethal dose if they'd been outside during the event. Think about what this means for the dream of colonizing Mars. If radiation limits human presence to just a few years before cancer risk becomes unacceptable, how do you build a permanent settlement? How do you raise children in an environment where their developing bodies are constantly bombarded by DNA-damaging radiation? Some people propose building underground habitats or covering structures with thick layers of Martian regolith, the dusty soil that covers the surface, to provide shielding. This could work, in theory. Several meters of regolith would absorb much of the radiation, but this means living in caves or bunkers, never seeing the Martian sky except through cameras or during brief, heavily shielded excursions to the surface. Is that really the vision of Mars colonization we've been sold? Living like moles, burrowing underground, hiding from the radiation sleeting down from space. It's survival, perhaps, but it's a far cry from the gleaming domes and sprawling cities of science fiction. And here's an even more disturbing thought. We don't fully understand the long-term biological effects of Martian radiation because we've never exposed humans to it for extended periods. The astronauts on the International Space Station are protected by Earth's magnetic field. We have data on cancer rates among radiation workers, atomic bomb survivors, and medical patients who received radiation therapy, but those involve different types of radiation, mostly gamma rays and X-rays, not the high-energy cosmic ray particles that would be the primary threat on Mars. Cosmic rays don't just damage DNA directly. When they slam into atoms in your body tissue, they create showers of secondary particles, neutrons, pions, and other exotic particles that cascade through your cells, causing multiple breaks in DNA strands. Your cells have repair mechanisms, but they're not perfect. Some damage gets repaired incorrectly, leading to mutations. Accumulate enough mutations in the wrong genes, and you get cancer. But there's another effect that's even less understood: damage to the central nervous system. Studies on mice exposed to simulated cosmic radiation have shown cognitive impairment, memory problems, and changes in behavior. The high-energy particles damage neurons and affect synaptic connections. Some researchers worry that astronauts spending years on Mars might return with early-onset dementia or permanent cognitive deficits. Imagine dedicating your life to becoming an astronaut, training for years, traveling to Mars, spending time exploring and conducting research, and then returning to Earth only to find that your memory is failing, your thinking is slower, your personality has changed. The radiation didn't kill you, but it damaged your brain in subtle, irreversible ways. This is not science fiction. This is genuine scientific concern based on laboratory studies and radiation biology research. Now let's talk about something that sounds almost mundane compared to radiation, but is equally insidious: Martian dust. When you look at pictures from Mars rovers, you see a reddish-brown landscape covered in fine, powdery dust. It looks almost like a desert on Earth, maybe the Atacama in Chile or the red deserts of Australia. But Martian dust is nothing like terrestrial sand or soil. It's uniquely dangerous in ways that could make long-term habitation nearly impossible. First, the composition. Martian dust is rich in iron oxide, rust, which gives Mars its distinctive red color, but it also contains perchlorates, chlorine-containing compounds that are toxic to humans. The Phoenix lander discovered perchlorates in Martian soil back in 2008, and every mission since has confirmed their widespread presence across the planet. Perchlorates interfere with thyroid function. The thyroid gland uses iodine to produce hormones that regulate metabolism, growth, and development. Perchlorates are chemically similar enough to iodine that they can block the thyroid's ability to absorb it, leading to hypothyroidism. Symptoms include fatigue, weight gain, depression, and in severe cases, developmental problems in children and fetuses. If you're living on Mars, breathing recycled air, drinking recycled water, eating food grown in Martian greenhouses, you're going to be exposed to perchlorates. They'll be in the dust that inevitably gets tracked inside habitats despite the best airlocks and cleaning procedures. They'll be in the soil used to grow crops unless it's extensively treated. They'll be in the water extracted from Martian ice unless it's thoroughly purified. Constant, chronic exposure to perchlorates is not something we have good data on because on Earth we generally avoid them. They're used in fireworks, rocket propellants, and explosives, but they're not something people encounter in daily life. On Mars, they'd be unavoidable, but the toxicity of Martian dust doesn't stop with perchlorates. The dust particles themselves are incredibly fine, much finer than desert sand on Earth, and they're jagged and sharp under a microscope because Mars lacks the water and wind patterns that round off particles through erosion like on Earth. These microscopic shards are roughly the consistency of broken glass at the nanometer scale. When Apollo astronauts returned from the Moon, they brought lunar dust into their spacecraft. The dust was so fine and clingy that it got everywhere, and several astronauts reported respiratory irritation, sneezing, and discomfort. Harrison Schmitt, geologist and Apollo 17 astronaut, experienced what he called lunar dust hay fever. His sinuses became inflamed and irritated from breathing the dust that had gotten into the cabin air despite precautions. Lunar dust and Martian dust share similar properties, extremely fine, electrostatically charged and sharp-edged. But Mars has something the Moon doesn't: dust storms, global dust storms. Storms that can envelope the entire planet for months. In 2018, a massive dust storm covered Mars and effectively ended the Opportunity rover's mission. The storm blocked so much sunlight that Opportunity's solar panels couldn't generate power, and the rover went silent, never to wake again. That storm lasted for months, turning day into twilight across vast regions of the planet. Imagine being a human settler during such an event. You can't go outside because visibility is near zero, and the dust would infiltrate your spacesuit's seals. Solar panels are useless, covered in dust, and receiving minimal sunlight. You're confined indoors for weeks or months, relying entirely on stored power and resources, hoping your life support systems don't fail, hoping the dust doesn't find its way inside through microscopic leaks. And when you finally can venture outside after the storm passes, everything is buried under a layer of toxic, electrically charged, razor-sharp dust that needs to be cleaned off solar panels, equipment, airlocks, windows, everything. It's an endless Sisyphean battle against an environment that's actively working to bury and corrode everything you build. There's also a more speculative but deeply concerning possibility regarding Martian dust. We don't know if it contains biological hazards. Now, before you think I'm talking about little green men or Martian bacteria, let me clarify. The likelihood of currently existing life on Mars is considered very low by most scientists, though not impossible. Subsurface ice deposits or deep underground aquifers might harbor microbial life. But here's the thing, even if Mars is completely sterile today, it might not have always been. Billions of years ago, Mars was warmer and wetter, with rivers, lakes, and possibly oceans. If life arose during that period and then died out as Mars lost its atmosphere and froze, the biomolecules, proteins, nucleic acids, cellular structures might still be present in the soil, preserved in the cold, dry conditions. What happens when human immune systems evolved to handle Earth's microbes, encounter alien organic molecules or fossilized cellular structures? We genuinely don't know. It could be nothing. It could trigger allergic reactions. In the absolute worst case, it could be something our immune systems recognize as a threat and overreact to, causing severe inflammation. This is one of the reasons planetary protection protocols are so strict. We sterilize spacecraft heading to Mars to avoid contaminating it with Earth life, and we'd need to quarantine samples returning from Mars to ensure they don't contain anything hazardous to Earth's biosphere. But if humans are living on Mars, handling Martian soil, breathing air that's been filtered through systems that might not catch every microscopic particle, exposure is inevitable. Are we prepared for that? Do we have protocols in place? The honest answer is, not really, because we don't know what we'd be preparing for. Let's shift to another challenge, one that's more mechanical but no less deadly: equipment failure. On Earth, if your car breaks down, it's an inconvenience. You call for help, wait for a tow truck, get it repaired. If your home's heater fails in winter, you layer on extra clothes, maybe stay with a friend, call a repair service. Backup systems and redundancy exist everywhere in modern society. On Mars, equipment failure means death. Your spacesuit develops a leak during an EVA, extravehicular activity, and you have minutes to get back to the airlock before you suffocate or your suit depressurizes completely. The habitat's heating system fails during the Martian night, when temperatures drop to -70 degrees Celsius, and you have maybe an hour before hypothermia sets in, assuming you can't repair it. The oxygen generator malfunctions, and you're drawing down limited reserves while frantically troubleshooting the problem, knowing that when the tanks run dry, that's it. Every single system that keeps you alive on Mars is artificial and can fail. And the challenge isn't just that things can break, it's that fixing them on Mars is exponentially harder than fixing them on Earth. Let's say a critical component in your water recycling system fails. On the International Space Station, this would be a serious problem, but Earth is only a few hours away via emergency return capsule if necessary. Resupply missions launch every few months. Engineers on the ground can troubleshoot in real time because communication delay is less than a second. On Mars, Earth is between 4 and 24 light minutes away depending on orbital positions. That means every message you send takes 4 to 24 minutes to reach Earth, and the response takes another 4 to 24 minutes to come back. A simple back-and-forth conversation that would take 5 minutes on Earth could take an hour on Mars. Troubleshooting complex technical problems under time pressure with that kind of communication delay is a nightmare, and there's no quick resupply. Launch windows between Earth and Mars only align every 26 months. If you desperately need a replacement part, and the next launch window is a year away, and the transit time is 7 to 9 months, you could be waiting nearly 2 years for a critical component. Can your backup systems and improvised repairs hold out that long? The Apollo 13 mission is famous for demonstrating human ingenuity under pressure. When an oxygen tank exploded, the crew and mission control worked together to jury-rig carbon dioxide scrubbers using plastic bags, cardboard, and duct tape. They survived and made it home, but they were only days from Earth, in constant communication with hundreds of engineers working around the clock to solve every problem, and they still nearly died. On Mars, You're on your own in ways that no human explorers have ever been before. The Martian environment is not just indifferent to your survival, it's actively hostile. Every breath, every degree of warmth, every drop of water is something you have to fight for continuously, without respite. And then there's the psychological dimension, which might be the most underestimated threat of all. Human beings are social creatures who evolved in diverse, dynamic environments. We need sunlight, fresh air, open spaces, the presence of other people, variety in our surroundings. Isolation studies, like those conducted in Antarctica, in submarine crews, in long-duration spaceflight simulations, consistently show that even psychologically screened, highly trained individuals start to experience problems after months of confinement: depression, anxiety, interpersonal conflicts, sleep disturbances, cognitive decline. These are common in isolated environments. And Antarctica, despite being one of the most remote and hostile places on Earth, is still Earth. You still have a 24-hour day-night cycle. You're still breathing Earth's air under Earth's gravity. You can still, in an absolute emergency, be evacuated within days. Mars offers none of these comforts. The day-night cycle is 24 hours and 37 minutes, just slightly off from Earth's rhythm, which seems trivial but can disrupt circadian rhythms over time. Gravity is only 38% of Earth's, which we'll discuss more shortly. The sky is a different color, butterscotch and salmon during the day due to dust in the atmosphere, blue around sunset paradoxically because of how dust scatters light. The landscape is utterly alien and unchanging, a frozen desert stretching to the horizon in every direction. You're living in a small, confined habitat with the same handful of people for years. You can't go outside without suiting up, and even then you're encased in a spacesuit, separated from the environment by layers of fabric and life support equipment. There are no forests to hike through, no oceans to swim in, no cities to visit, no spontaneity, no privacy, no escape, and constantly, in the back of your mind, is the knowledge that everything keeping you alive is artificial and can fail. That one mistake, one malfunction, one unexpected problem could kill you. That if you get seriously injured or ill, medical care is limited to whatever equipment and expertise exists within your small crew. There's no hospital, no specialists, no advanced treatments. You can't be airlifted to a trauma center. You can't be put on a transplant list. If something goes catastrophically wrong with your health, you die on Mars. The psychological term for this is chronic stress, and its effects on human health are well documented. Elevated cortisol levels, suppressed immune function, increased risk of cardiovascular disease, impaired cognitive performance, shortened telomeres associated with aging. Chronic stress literally damages your body at the cellular level. Some people are remarkably resilient. The astronauts who've spent nearly a year on the International Space Station, like Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, demonstrated that humans can endure long-duration spaceflight. But the ISS is still in many ways connected to Earth. Crews rotate every few months, bringing fresh faces and news from home. Resupply vehicles arrive regularly with fresh food and personal items. In an emergency, you can be home within hours. None of this applies to Mars. The first Mars crew will be isolated for at least 2.5 years, the minimum mission duration to wait for a return launch window after arriving. More realistically, we're talking about 3 years or longer. 3 years in a confined habitat with perhaps 4 to 6 other people, knowing you're 100 million kilometers from home, knowing that help isn't coming if something goes wrong. Can humans maintain mental health under those conditions? Probably some can. But not everyone, and the psychological screening required to identify those who can is still being developed. We're venturing into genuinely unprecedented territory in terms of isolation and duration. Now let's address something that sounds almost science fiction, but is grounded in very real biology. What Mars's low gravity does to the human body. Mars's gravity is 38% of Earth's. That means if you weigh 100 kilograms on Earth, you'd weigh only 38 kilograms on Mars. That might sound pleasant. Imagine how easy it would be to jump, to lift heavy objects, to move around. In the short term, lower gravity feels liberating. Astronauts on the Moon described the bouncing, loping gait they used to move around as enjoyable, almost playful, but human bodies didn't evolve for low gravity. We evolved over millions of years under 1G Earth's gravitational acceleration. Every system in our body, from our cardiovascular system to our musculoskeletal system to our vestibular system that controls balance, is calibrated for Earth's gravity. Take us out of that gravity well, and things start breaking down. We know this from studying astronauts in microgravity on the International Space Station. In the absence of gravity, astronauts lose bone density at a rate of about 1 to 2% per month. That's 12 to 24% per year. The bones most affected are the weight-bearing ones, hips, spine, legs, the very bones that support us when we stand and walk on Earth. Why does this happen? Bone is living tissue, constantly being broken down and rebuilt through a process called remodeling. Cells called osteoclasts dissolve old bone, while cells called osteoblasts build new bone. This balance is regulated by mechanical stress. When you walk, run, lift weights, gravity loads your skeleton, signaling osteoblasts to build more bone. Remove that stress and the balance shifts. Osteoclast activity continues, but osteoblast activity decreases. The result, net bone loss. On Mars, gravity is reduced but not absent. Would 38% gravity be enough to maintain bone health? Honestly, we don't know. We have data from 0 gravity and 1 gravity, but nothing in between. It's possible that even reduced gravity provides sufficient mechanical loading to slow or prevent bone loss. It's also possible that it doesn't, and Mars colonists would still experience progressive osteoporosis. Imagine living on Mars for 5 years and losing 20, 30, 40% of your bone density. Your skeleton becomes fragile, brittle. A fall that would bruise you on Earth could break your hip on Mars, or back on Earth if you ever return. Vertebrae might compress under their own weight. If you come back to full gravity, you'd be at risk for fractures for the rest of your life. Current countermeasures on the ISS include 2 to 3 hours of exercise per day, using resistance equipment and treadmills with bungee cords to simulate body weight. But even with rigorous exercise, astronauts still lose bone density. It's slowed but not prevented. And that's with astronauts dedicating hours every day to working out. How practical is that for colonists who need to perform scientific research, maintain habitats, grow food, and handle the 1,000 other tasks required for survival? Muscle atrophy is another consequence. In microgravity, astronauts lose muscle mass and strength rapidly, up to 20% loss in some muscle groups during a 6-month mission, despite exercise. Your heart is also a muscle, and in lower gravity, it doesn't have to work as hard to pump blood. Over time, it can atrophy slightly, becoming less efficient. What happens if you spend years on Mars and then try to return to Earth? The transition back to full gravity could be devastating. Your weakened bones, diminished muscles, and deconditioned cardiovascular system would suddenly have to support your full Earth weight. Standing up might be difficult. Walking more than a few steps could be exhausting. Recovery could take months or years, and some changes might be permanent. This raises a profound question. Would Mars colonists ever be able to return to Earth? Or would settling on Mars be a one-way trip, not because the technology doesn't exist to bring you back, but because your body has adapted to Martian gravity in ways that make Earth's gravity unlivable? And what about children? If humans establish a permanent settlement on Mars and children are born there, they would develop under 0.38 G. Their bones would form differently, their muscles would develop differently. Their hearts would adapt to lower gravity from birth. Could a person born and raised on Mars ever come to Earth? Would their skeleton collapse under Earth's gravity? Would their heart fail trying to pump blood against 3 times the gravitational pull they evolved in? We have no answers to these questions because we've never tried. Every human who has ever lived was born on Earth and developed under Earth's gravity. A person born on Mars would be, in a very real sense, a different kind of human, Homo sapiens martis perhaps, adapted to their new world but possibly incapable of living on the ancestral one. This isn't just speculation. We see similar adaptations in animals. Deep-sea fish that live under enormous pressure cannot survive at surface pressure. Their bodies literally fall apart. Conversely, surface organisms cannot survive in the deep ocean. Gravity is a fundamental environmental parameter, and life adapts to it. Change it significantly, and you change what forms of life can exist there. Then there's the issue of reproduction itself. We have no data on mammalian reproduction in reduced gravity. Studies on rats and mice in spaceflight have shown disruptions to pregnancy, fetal development issues, and complications during birth. These are preliminary findings and not conclusive, but they're concerning. Human pregnancy is complex and finely tuned. The developing fetus experiences specific gravitational forces. The mother's cardiovascular system undergoes dramatic changes to support pregnancy. Blood volume increases by 30 to 50%. The heart works harder. Fluid distribution shifts. All of this happens under 1G. What happens under 0.38 G? Does fetal development proceed normally? Do bones and muscles form properly? Is there an increased risk of miscarriage, birth defects, or complications during delivery? Can a woman in reduced gravity safely carry a pregnancy to term? We don't know, and until we do, the idea of a self-sustaining Mars colony capable of reproducing itself is purely theoretical. We might send colonists to Mars only to discover that human reproduction simply doesn't work there, that every new generation must be born on Earth and transported to Mars, forever tying any Martian settlement to Earth in a way that makes true independence impossible. Let's talk about water, because while Mars has water, accessing it and using it safely is far more complicated than it appears. When scientists announced that Mars has water ice at the poles and buried in subsurface deposits across much of the planet, it was heralded as a breakthrough for future colonization. And it is significant. Water means you don't have to transport it all from Earth, which would be impossibly expensive. You can extract it from Martian ice, purify it, split it into hydrogen and oxygen for breathing and rocket fuel. In theory, this makes Mars colonization feasible, but theory and practice are very different things. First, you have to find water ice deposits near your landing site. The polar ice caps are obvious locations, but they're also the coldest places on Mars, with temperatures dropping to -125 degrees Celsius. Building habitats and operating equipment in those temperatures is extraordinarily challenging. Alternatively, you target mid-latitude regions where orbital radar has detected subsurface ice, but that ice could be buried under meters of regolith. You'd need to excavate it, heat it to melt it, collect the water, all processes that require significant energy and equipment. Once you've extracted water ice and melted it, you face the next challenge. Martian water likely contains dissolved salts, especially perchlorates, which we already discussed. It will need extensive purification before it's safe to drink or use for agriculture. The purification process requires filters, chemical treatments, distillation, more equipment that can fail, more consumables that need to be resupplied or manufactured on site, and you need a lot of water. A human needs about 2 to 3 liters per day for drinking, but total water usage, including hygiene, food preparation, and life support systems, is much higher, around 50 liters per person per day in optimized spacecraft systems. For agriculture, growing food requires even more. A small greenhouse supporting a crew of 6 might need hundreds of liters per day. Recycling is essential. On the International Space Station, the Environmental Control and Life Support System recycles about 93% of water, including moisture from the air and even urine. That remaining 7% has to be resupplied. On Mars, you can't resupply easily, so you'd need to extract enough water locally to make up for losses while maintaining your recycled supply. This creates a constant demand for energy. Melting ice, purifying water, running recycling systems, it all requires power. And power on Mars is a challenge in itself. Solar power seems like the obvious choice. Mars receives sunlight, though only about 44% as much as Earth does because it's farther from the sun. Solar panels work on Mars. That's how the Spirit and Opportunity rovers operated for years. But there are problems. First, dust. Martian dust settles on solar panels, reducing their efficiency. The Mars rovers experience this constantly, watching their power output decline as dust accumulated. Occasionally, dust devils, miniature whirlwinds, would blow across the panels and clean them off, restoring power. But you can't rely on random dust devils to keep your life support systems running. You'd need regular maintenance, sending crew members outside in spacesuits to clean panels, exposing them to radiation and equipment failure risk every time. Second, dust storms. During the global dust storm of 2018, sunlight reaching the surface dropped so dramatically that Opportunity's panels couldn't generate enough power to keep the rover alive. If your colony relies on solar power and a months-long dust storm hits, you're in severe trouble. Nuclear power is the alternative. Small nuclear reactors like the kilopower system NASA has been developing could provide continuous, reliable power regardless of weather or time of day. But nuclear reactors are complex, require careful handling of radioactive materials, produce waste that must be managed, and can fail catastrophically if something goes wrong. Imagine a reactor malfunction on Mars. You can't evacuate the area easily. You're wearing spacesuits, movement is slow, and there's nowhere truly safe to go. The habitat is right there, relying on that power. Radiation from a damaged reactor adds to the already high background radiation. A Chernobyl-scale disaster on Mars would effectively render the entire settlement uninhabitable. Even if power systems work flawlessly, there's still the matter of food. Long-term, you cannot rely on supplies from Earth. A Mars colony needs to produce its own food, which means agriculture. Growing plants on Mars is theoretically possible. We've grown plants in simulated Martian soil on Earth. But that soil needs to be heavily amended. Martian regolith contains those toxic perchlorates, lacks organic matter, has different mineral composition than Earth's soil, and may contain sharp particles that damage plant roots. You'd need to either extensively wash and treat Martian soil or bring growth medium from Earth. Then you need water, light, controlled temperature and atmosphere, essentially pressurized greenhouses with artificial lighting, since Martian sunlight is dim and the atmosphere blocks different wavelengths than Earth's does. Plants also need nitrogen, which is scarce on Mars. Earth's atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, which cycles through the soil via bacteria that fix atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can use. Mars's atmosphere is only 2.7% nitrogen. You'd need to either import nitrogen, extract it painstakingly from the atmosphere, or carefully recycle every bit within your closed-loop agricultural system. And pollination. Many plants need insects or wind for pollination. You'd have to hand-pollinate or bring insects, creating a contained ecosystem. But ecosystems are complex. They're balanced webs of interactions that we don't fully understand. Creating a stable, closed-loop ecosystem that produces food reliably without collapsing is something we've attempted on Earth and struggled with. Biosphere 2, built in the Arizona desert in the early 90s, was an ambitious attempt to create a self-sustaining ecosystem under glass. It had 8 people, thousands of species of plants and animals, and covered 3.14 acres. Within months, oxygen levels dropped dangerously low due to unexpected microbial activity in the soil consuming oxygen. Carbon dioxide levels fluctuated wildly. Most of the vertebrate species and all of the pollinating insects died. The project had to pump in oxygen from outside to keep the crew alive, and Biosphere 2 was on Earth. With Earth's gravity, Earth's magnetic field protecting it from radiation, unlimited sunlight, and support teams just outside, it still failed to maintain a stable, closed ecosystem. Now imagine trying that on Mars, in a smaller habitat, with limited resources, no possibility of external support, and all the additional stresses we've already discussed. The challenges multiply exponentially. There's another dimension to the Mars challenge that doesn't get discussed enough: the sheer distance from Earth and what that means, not just for supplies and communication, but for our fundamental sense of being human. When the Apollo astronauts traveled to the Moon, they were about 384,000 kilometers from Earth. That's roughly 1 light second. Earth was always visible in their sky, a beautiful blue marble hanging in the darkness, a reminder of home, of everyone and everything they'd ever known. The psychological impact of seeing Earth from that perspective was profound. Many astronauts described it as life-changing, giving them a deep appreciation for the fragility and interconnectedness of life on our planet. Mars, at its closest approach to Earth, is about 55 million kilometers away. At its farthest, it's 400 million kilometers distant. From Mars, Earth would be just a bright point of light in the sky, indistinguishable from Venus to the naked eye. You could point to it and say, "That's home," but it wouldn't look like home. It would look like just another star. The psychological impact of that distance is difficult to overstate. Every human who has ever lived has lived within the embrace of Earth's biosphere. Even astronauts on the International Space Station can look down and see continents, oceans, clouds. The living Earth just a few hundred kilometers below. The Mars colonists would be the first humans in history to be truly separated from Earth, to be living on another world where Earth is just a distant light. Some people might find that liberating, exciting, the ultimate adventure. But for many, the isolation would be crushing. Homesickness wouldn't be longing for a place you can visit in a few hours. It would be yearning for a world you might never see again, that you can't even properly see from where you are. And communication, as we touched on earlier, has that terrible time delay. Every conversation with someone on Earth becomes an exchange of recorded messages. You can't have a spontaneous chat with family or friends. You send a message, wait 8 to 48 minutes for a response depending on orbital positions, reply, wait again. Phone calls as we know them don't exist. Video calls are impossible. Imagine experiencing a crisis, a medical emergency, a personal loss, a moment of deep psychological distress, and not being able to talk to anyone on Earth about it in real time. Your therapist, your family, your friends, they're all 20 minutes or more in the past by the time you can communicate with them. By the time their response reaches you, your situation might have changed, your emotional state shifted. The support network that humans rely on for mental health is fundamentally broken by distance and physics. There's also the matter of governance and autonomy. A Mars colony would be, by necessity, largely self-governing. You can't run a settlement where every decision has to be communicated to Earth and wait hours for approval. The colonists would need to make their own choices, solve their own problems, create their own society, but they'd also be completely dependent on Earth for survival, at least initially. Every critical spare part, every specialized piece of equipment, every emergency supply would come from Earth. That creates a strange power dynamic. autonomous in daily operations but dependent for survival. What happens if Earth and Mars disagree? If a corporation or government funding the mission demands something the colonists refuse to do? Can Earth threaten to cut off supplies? Can the colonists declare independence when they can't survive without Earth's support? These aren't just political questions, they're survival questions, and we have no precedent for them. Antarctica has research stations, but they're temporary, rotational, and governed by international treaty. Mars would be different, potentially permanent, self-sustaining eventually, and the first extraterrestrial territory humans have ever occupied. Let's also consider medical care, because what happens when someone gets seriously sick or injured on Mars? Your medical facilities are limited to whatever equipment fits in the habitat and whatever expertise exists within your small crew. You might have a doctor or medic with advanced training, but they can't be a specialist in everything. If someone develops appendicitis, can you perform emergency surgery in a small medical bay with limited equipment? If someone has a heart attack, do you have the diagnostic tools, medications, and interventions needed? What about chronic conditions, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, cancer, conditions that require ongoing medication and monitoring? Those medications would need to be stockpiled or synthesized on Mars. Any diagnostic equipment, MRI scanners, CT scanners, blood analysis machines, would need to be transported and maintained. And something we don't think about enough, dental care. Tooth problems might seem trivial compared to radiation exposure and equipment failures, but a severe toothache, an abscess, or a broken tooth is agonizing and can become life-threatening if infected. You'd need dental equipment and someone trained to use it. Mental health care is equally critical. We've discussed the psychological stresses, but what about treating them? Medications for depression, anxiety, sleep disorders. You'd need a pharmacy's worth of psychiatric drugs. You'd need trained counselors or psychiatrists. And if someone develops severe mental illness, psychosis, suicidal ideation, violent behavior, what do? There are no psychiatric hospitals on Mars. Restraining or sedating someone in a small habitat where everyone depends on everyone else for survival creates impossible ethical dilemmas. Pregnancy, which we touched on earlier, also presents massive medical challenges. Even if conception and fetal development proceed normally, childbirth is risky under the best circumstances. Maternal mortality rates in modern hospitals with full medical teams and equipment are low but not zero. Complications can happen. Hemorrhaging, preeclampsia, obstructed labor that require immediate, expert intervention. Can you safely deliver a baby on Mars? Maybe, if everything goes perfectly. But obstetrics is full of situations where things don't go perfectly. You might need an emergency cesarean section. You might need blood transfusions. The newborn might need neonatal intensive care. How do you provide that in a habitat with limited medical resources and no possibility of transferring the patient to a better equipped facility? Let's examine something that connects all these challenges together. The problem of redundancy and the margin for error, or rather the lack of it. Engineering systems designed for extreme environments rely heavily on redundancy, backup systems, backups, multiple pathways to accomplish critical functions. The International Space Station is a masterpiece of redundant systems. It has multiple oxygen generation systems, backup power supplies, redundant computers, duplicate critical components. If one system fails, another takes over, but the ISS weighs about 420 tons. It was assembled over more than 40 flights across 13 years, each launch delivering carefully designed modules and components. It's a massive, incredibly expensive structure supported by the combined space programs of the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. A Mars habitat, at least initially, would be orders of magnitude smaller and simpler. The mass budget for getting anything to Mars is brutally restrictive. Every kilogram of payload requires enormous amounts of fuel and cost. You cannot simply scale up to ISS-level redundancy. You have to choose carefully what to bring, what to build on site, and where to accept risk. This means operating closer to the edge of failure than we ever would on Earth or even in Earth orbit. Margins are thinner, backup systems are fewer. When something breaks, you might not have a replacement. You improvise, you adapt, you make do with what you have. But sometimes that's not enough. Think about the Apollo 13 mission again. That mission survived because of three things: brilliant engineering, calm decision-making under pressure, and proximity to Earth. Mission Control had hundreds of engineers working on solutions. They could test procedures in simulators identical to the spacecraft. Communication was instantaneous, and the crew only had to survive for a few days before splashing down in the Pacific. Mars offers none of these advantages. Communication delays prevent real-time troubleshooting. Earth-based engineers can't test solutions on identical hardware because there are no identical habitats on Earth experiencing identical Martian conditions. And survive for a few days isn't the challenge. It's survive for years, potentially decades. Every day on Mars is a day where nothing critical can fail. Every day is a day where the habitat maintains pressure, oxygen keeps flowing, temperature stays within survivable range, water keeps cycling, power keeps generating, food keeps growing, every single day, for years. The probability of a critical failure over that timescale isn't zero. It's actually quite high unless systems are designed to near perfection. And achieving near perfection with the mass and cost constraints of a Mars mission is brutally difficult. Now let me introduce you to a concept that doesn't get enough attention in discussions about Mars colonization: the overview effect in reverse. The overview effect is a term coined by author Frank White to describe the cognitive shift astronauts experience when seeing Earth from space. They describe feeling a profound sense of unity, of seeing Earth as a fragile oasis in the void, of understanding viscerally that all of humanity shares this one small world. National boundaries disappear, conflicts seem petty. The interconnectedness of all life becomes undeniable. But what happens when Earth is just a point of light, when you're standing on an alien world that's actively trying to kill you, when you're surrounded by lifeless, sterile rocks stretching to every horizon? Some researchers worry about the opposite effect, a profound sense of isolation, of disconnection, of being utterly alone in a universe that doesn't care whether you live or die. Mars is dead. Let that sink in. If Mars ever had life, and we don't know if it did, it's gone now. The planet is a frozen desert, scoured by dust storms, bombarded by radiation, geologically almost inactive. There are no forests, no oceans, no birds singing at dawn, no insects buzzing through summer air. There's no rain falling, no rivers flowing, no seasons in the sense we know them. Just rock, dust, ice, and thin poisonous air. Earth, for all its problems, is alive. The biosphere is an impossibly complex web of life that's been evolving for 3.7 billion years. Millions of species, trillions upon trillions of individual organisms, all interacting, all part of cycles of energy and matter that transform rock and water and sunlight into the living world. You are part of that. Every cell in your body contains mitochondria descended from ancient bacteria. Your DNA carries echoes of fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, the entire evolutionary tree that led to humans. You breathe oxygen produced by photosynthetic organisms. You eat food that grew from soil enriched by decomposers breaking down dead organic matter. You are embedded in Earth's biosphere in ways so fundamental that separating yourself from it might be impossible without severe consequences. On Mars, you'd be living in a tiny bubble of Earth's biosphere, artificially maintained. Plants in a greenhouse, maybe some bacteria and fungi for composting and soil health, humans, and that's it. The complexity, the diversity, the resilience of Earth's biosphere would be reduced to a handful of species in a sealed box. Ecologists call this fragility. Simple ecosystems are unstable. Remove one species and the whole thing can collapse. Earth's biosphere is resilient precisely because of its complexity. Thousands of redundant pathways, species that can fill niches if others disappear, robust cycles that continue even when disrupted. Your Mars colony has none of that resilience. Lose your pollinating insects and your crops fail. Have a bacterial contamination that kills your composting microbes and your waste recycling system breaks down. It's a house of cards where every card is essential. There's also something we need to discuss that sounds almost philosophical but has real practical implications. The question of whether humans can psychologically adapt to living on a fundamentally dead world. Biophilia is a hypothesis proposed by biologist Edward O. Wilson, suggesting that humans have an innate tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. It's why we keep houseplants, why gardens improve mental health, why nature walks reduce stress. We evolved in living environments, and our psychology reflects that. Studies of people living in extreme isolation, Antarctic research stations, submarines, long-duration spaceflight show that access to nature, even simulated nature like photographs or videos of natural scenes, improves psychological well-being. Astronauts on the ISS talk about how much they enjoy looking at Earth, watching weather patterns, identifying familiar geography. On Mars, there is no nature beyond what you bring with you. Looking out your window doesn't show you forests or oceans, it shows you rocks and dust, always. The landscape doesn't change except when dust storms roll through. There are no seasons bringing new growth, no wildlife, no sound of wind through leaves or waves on a shore, just silence, stillness, and sterility. Can humans maintain psychological health in such an environment for years, decades, generations? We don't know because we've never tried. But the evidence from isolation studies suggests it would be incredibly difficult. Now let's talk about something that combines many of these challenges into one terrifying scenario. What happens during a medical emergency that requires immediate evacuation? On Earth, if you're seriously injured or ill, emergency services can reach you in minutes to hours depending on location. Even in remote areas like Antarctica or the middle of the ocean, evacuation within days is possible. In space, astronauts on the ISS have emergency return capsules. If something goes catastrophically wrong, they can be on the ground within a few hours. On Mars, there is no emergency evacuation. The launch window to return to Earth only opens every 26 months. Even when the window is open, the journey takes 7 to 9 months. If someone develops a life-threatening condition, severe trauma, aggressive cancer, neurological emergency, and it happens between launch windows, they will die on Mars. There's no way around it. Imagine being a crew member watching a friend, a colleague, someone you've lived and worked alongside for years, dying from a condition that would be treatable on Earth. You can provide comfort, palliative care, but you cannot save them. And when they die, you cannot bury them in Earth's soil, cannot hold a funeral with their family present. You're dealing with death in an alien environment, far from any support systems humans have developed over millennia of culture and grieving rituals. And the body, what do you do with it? Burial on Mars seems disrespectful somehow, leaving human remains on another world. But you can't keep a body indefinitely in your small habitat for years until the next Earth return mission. Do you preserve it somehow? Cremate it and keep the ashes? These are grim questions with no good answers. The psychological impact on the surviving crew would be severe. Grief, survivor's guilt, the constant reminder that death is one malfunction or one accident away. Mission control might recommend psychological support, but remember that communication delay, Your counselor's words of comfort are 20 minutes in the past by the time you hear them. Let's shift to another sobering reality: the economic sustainability of Mars colonization. The International Space Station costs roughly $3 to $4 billion per year to operate. That's for a facility in low Earth orbit, relatively easy to reach and resupply. The cost per kilogram to launch to LEO is currently around $1,500 to $3,000 using the most cost-effective rockets available. Getting to Mars costs vastly more. Estimates vary, but launching a kilogram of payload to Mars's surface likely costs tens of thousands of dollars, possibly over $100,000 per kilogram depending on mission architecture. A single human requires life support, food, water, equipment, habitat space, easily several tons of mass. Multiply that by a crew of 6, 8, 10 people, add all the infrastructure needed for a permanent settlement, and you're talking about hundreds of billions, possibly trillions of dollars. Who pays for this? Governments could fund it as exploration and science, but sustained funding for decades is politically challenging. We've seen this with NASA's budget. Ambitious plans get defunded, delayed, or cancelled when administrations change or priorities shift. Private companies might fund it hoping for eventual profit, but from what? Mars has no resources that are valuable enough to justify the transportation costs back to Earth. The only potentially valuable resource is knowledge, scientific data, but that doesn't generate the kind of revenue needed to sustain a colony. Some proponents suggest Mars could eventually become self-sufficient, manufacturing everything it needs from local resources. But achieving that level of industrial capacity requires enormous infrastructure: mines, refineries, factories, power plants, chemical processing facilities, all of which must be built using materials brought from Earth initially, or painstakingly extracted and processed on Mars with limited equipment. The bootstrap problem is immense. You need advanced manufacturing to become self-sufficient, but you need to be self-sufficient to afford advanced manufacturing. Breaking that cycle requires sustained, massive investment with no expectation of financial return for decades, possibly centuries. Compare this to historical colonization on Earth. European colonization of the Americas, for all its horrific impacts on indigenous peoples, was economically motivated and sustained. Colonizers could breathe the air, drink the water, hunt for food, grow crops. Ships could sail back and forth multiple times per year. Resources like gold, silver, timber, and agricultural products could be shipped back to Europe at a profit. Mars offers none of these advantages. You can't breathe the air, can't drink the water without extensive processing, can't grow food without pressurized greenhouses. Ships, spacecraft, can only travel every 26 months and cost billions per mission. There are no resources valuable enough to export at a profit. This means Mars colonization would be sustained entirely by subsidy, either from governments for scientific and prestige purposes, or from extraordinarily wealthy individuals willing to spend their fortunes on an idealistic vision of humanity becoming multiplanetary. How long can such subsidies continue? What happens when political winds shift, when billionaires die or lose interest, when economic crises make continued funding impossible? A Mars colony dependent on Earth for survival cannot simply tough it out. If supplies stop coming, people die. There's also the legal and ethical framework to consider. Outer space, including Mars, is governed by the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which states that outer space is the province of all mankind and that celestial bodies cannot be claimed by any nation. No country can own Mars, in theory, but if a private company establishes a settlement, do they have rights to the resources they extract? Can they claim land? If someone is born on Mars, what's their citizenship? What laws apply? If a crime is committed on Mars, who has jurisdiction? These aren't theoretical questions. They're practical issues that would need to be resolved before permanent settlement. And international law moves slowly, achieving consensus among Earth's nations about Martian governance, while those nations have competing interests and priorities, could take decades. We've now walked through radiation, atmospheric toxicity, dust hazards, equipment dependency, psychological isolation, low gravity effects, water challenges, power limitations, agricultural difficulties, medical vulnerabilities, communication delays, and economic unsustainability. Each one alone is a severe challenge. Together, they create a compounding series of threats that make Mars colonization not just difficult, but potentially impossible for permanent human habitation. But let me address the counter-arguments, because there are smart people who genuinely believe Mars colonization is not only possible but necessary. Technology will solve these problems, perhaps. Technology has solved countless problems throughout human history that once seemed insurmountable. But there are physical limits. You cannot engineer away cosmic radiation without massive shielding or a magnetic field, neither of which we can currently create on Mars. You cannot change Mars's gravity without fundamentally altering the planet's mass. You cannot give Mars a breathable atmosphere without a multi-generational terraforming project that might not even be possible. Some problems are solvable with better engineering. Others run into hard physical constraints that no amount of innovation can overcome, at least not with anything resembling current or near-future technology. Humans are explorers. We've always pushed into hostile environments. True, humans have settled the Arctic, the Sahara, high mountain ranges, remote islands. But every place humans have successfully colonized on Earth, no matter how harsh, has breathable air, accessible water, tolerable gravity, and protection from space radiation via Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field. Mars has none of these. The most extreme environment humans permanently inhabit on Earth is probably Antarctica, and even there, settlements are research stations with rotating crews, regular resupply, and the knowledge that you can leave. Nobody is born in Antarctica. Nobody lives there for their entire life. It's a temporary posting, not a civilization. We need a backup for humanity in case something happens to Earth. This is the argument that resonates most emotionally, that we need to become a multi-planetary species to ensure survival if Earth becomes uninhabitable due to asteroid impact, nuclear war, climate catastrophe, or some other existential threat. But here's the problem. Mars is already uninhabitable in ways that are far worse than any plausible Earth catastrophe. Even after a nuclear war, Earth would still have breathable air, accessible water, and livable gravity. Even with severe climate change, Earth would be far more hospitable than Mars currently is. The only scenarios where Mars becomes a better option than Earth are ones where Earth is completely sterilized, total loss of atmosphere, surface rendered molten, and those scenarios are virtually impossible outside of the Sun, eventually expanding into a red giant billions of years from now. If our goal is to preserve humanity against existential threats, there are far more cost-effective approaches. Robust disaster preparedness, nuclear non-proliferation, climate change mitigation, asteroid detection and deflection systems, seed vaults and genetic archives. Spending trillions of dollars to put a few hundred or thousand people on Mars doesn't meaningfully reduce existential risk when Earth will always be more livable and support vastly larger populations. We should do it because it's inspiring, because it pushes human boundaries. This is a values argument, and it's harder to counter because inspiration has value. The Apollo program inspired generations of scientists and engineers. Images from Mars rovers spark wonder and curiosity. There's something deeply human about the desire to explore, to venture into the unknown. But inspiration has to be weighed against cost and risk. is spending trillions of dollars and potentially sacrificing human lives to establish a fragile, dependent settlement on Mars more inspiring than using those resources to solve problems on Earth, curing diseases, lifting people out of poverty, protecting ecosystems, advancing science in ways that benefit all of humanity? Reasonable people can disagree on that value judgment, but we should be honest about what we're choosing and what we're giving up. So where does this leave us? Mars is lethal, not in the sense that brief visits are impossible. We'll almost certainly send humans to Mars within the next few decades for short-term missions, flags and footprints expeditions that prove it can be done, but permanent colonization, self-sustaining settlements, a true second home for humanity. The obstacles are so severe, so fundamental, so rooted in the physical properties of Mars itself that they may be insurmountable with any technology we can realistically envision. Could we build underground habitats with massive radiation shielding? Yes, technically, but the cost and complexity are staggering. Could we create rotating habitats to simulate Earth gravity? Possibly, but we've never built anything like that, and it would be a massive engineering undertaking. Could we eventually terraform Mars, giving it a thicker atmosphere and stronger magnetic field? The timescales for such a project are measured in centuries or millennia, assuming it's even possible. And all of this assumes we should. There's an ethical dimension that's often overlooked. If Mars has any indigenous life, even microbial, do we have the right to contaminate it with Earth organisms? Don't we have a responsibility to study and understand Mars in its pristine state before we irreversibly alter it? Conversely, some argue we have a moral imperative to spread life through the cosmos, that a dead planet brought to life is inherently valuable. These are deep questions without clear answers. Here's my conclusion, and I want to be clear that this is analysis based on current scientific understanding, not absolute prophecy. Mars will likely remain a destination for scientific research and short-term human missions, but not a site for permanent, self-sustaining colonization within any time frame we can realistically plan for. The challenges are too severe, the costs too high, the risks too great, and the benefits too uncertain. Does this mean we shouldn't explore Mars? Absolutely not. Robotic missions are incredibly valuable. They've transformed our understanding of planetary science, taught us about climate, geology, and the potential for past life. Sending humans for temporary missions could provide insights robots cannot. But the vision of Martian cities, of thousands or millions of people living and thriving on Mars, of humanity becoming a truly multiplanetary species by establishing a second permanent home, that vision, as inspiring as it is, runs headlong into the brutal physical realities we've discussed. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe breakthrough technologies will emerge that solve these problems in ways we can't currently imagine. Maybe future generations will look back on this analysis the way we look back at 19th century scientists who thought human bodies couldn't survive traveling faster than 60 kilometers per hour on trains. But based on what we know now about biology, about physics, about Mars, about the challenges of life support and the constraints of engineering and economics, Mars remains what it has always been, a beautiful, fascinating, scientifically invaluable world that is fundamentally incompatible with human life. We are children of Earth, shaped by billions of years of evolution in Earth's specific conditions. Mars is not Earth, and pretending otherwise, however noble our aspirations, doesn't change the reality that some places in the universe simply aren't meant for us. One last thing before you go. Download the Mars in 15 Minutes guide in the description and actually observe Mars tonight. You spent a few minutes learning why it's deadly. Spend 15 more seeing it with your own eyes. Trust me, you'll never look at the night sky the same way. Links in the description below.